Hey folks, Dr. McCarthy here, and I want to welcome you to our Thursday evening workshop. Tonight we're going to talk about something that's very near and dear to me. We're going to talk about food sensitivities, and we're going to spend most of our time this evening talking about gluten. I was the very first gluten coach, the very first certified gluten coach in the state of North Carolina. I've been studying this for a very long time. I'm not going to brag, but I know what I'm talking about. One of the things that bothers me so is I've been dealing with patients in gluten sensitivity for over the past decade, and it's really just now that the medical community is starting to give the topic of gluten sensitivity and food sensitivities any kind of lip service. Issues are that they're still not doing it the right way, so we're going to talk about that tonight. Just a little bit about me. And gluten is just one of the big food sensitivities that we deal with. Our approach here in the office is what we call a neurometabolic approach. We treat patients neurologically, where we do things like brain-based therapy or oxygen therapy. We do a lot of eye exercises or balance exercise. We do lots of different kind of neurological work. The metabolic part is where we change your body chemistry according to very extensive blood work that we run. When we get the results of the labs, it tells us, here's some things that are wrong. You got really low magnesium, your vitamin D is really low, you got high levels of thyroid antibodies, whatever it might be. So we go through that and then we make some changes and say, okay, you got to start to take some vitamin D, and we're going to have to use some pH salts to raise your pH level to a more alkaline range. So that's the metabolic approach, and that's the way we work with our patients. It's a unique approach. There's maybe hundreds of doctors. That's it. Maybe 1,000 doctors across the country who practice this way. What's important to remember, though, is that when we're treating someone neurologically, it's helping me to fix what's going on metabolically. When we treat people metabolically, it's helping us to fix people with neurological problems. So it's kind of like we're two sides of the coin. We're working on both of them at the same time, and it enables us to get a better result. Last week, we talked about the gut-brain connection, and this is very similar to that. Obviously, the brain is the neurological part, and the gut is the metabolic part. So if we can work on both of these things at the same time, it enables us to get great results. We've created a whole bunch of DVDs, and I'll show you the first one we did was breakthrough treatments for chronic health problems, the management of chronic neurological and metabolic conditions. That's what we're talking about, the neurometabolic approach. Some of the people that we see here, actually lots of the people that we see here, have come in and they've been labeled, they've been given the diagnosis of fibromyalgia. So we created this DVD, Breakthrough Treatments for Fibromyalgia. There can be 10 people in a row who walk in my door who were all told you have fibromyalgia. But I'm telling you that each one of those 10 people has something different wrong with them. And they've got multiple different things wrong with them, but it's a different combination of things for everybody that walks in the door. So, we don't treat the labels. I don't treat thyroid problems. I don't treat Hashimotos. I don't treat fibromyalgia. I don't treat peripheral neuropathy. What we do is we treat the person that walks in the door. So if you got this label, peripheral neuropathy, and you're taking drugs and you're not getting better, you've got to call me. And this is one of the big issues that we deal with. Nobody in the traditional healthcare model, very few people, are even looking into this. And I'm going to tell you tonight why it's such a big problem. So, the peripheral neuropathy, if you've got hypothyroid, and the most common cause of hypothyroid is Hashimotos, which is an autoimmune thyroid problem. If that's what you're dealing with, this is mandatory. You have got to have the metabolic side of care looked at, evaluated properly, and taken care of by somebody who knows what they're doing. And invariably, not a week goes by that someone doesn't contact me after doing one of these workshops from, the Pacific Northwest, from South Florida, from New Mexico. We get, I've had calls from other countries, and we have people who contact us and say, where am I going to find someone who does this? I'll help you, to the best of my ability, I'll help you. If you're not here, within 100 miles of my office, I'll help you find somebody, all right? So today, I just want to spend the next few moments talking about gluten. When I started doing workshops and teaching people about this, most people didn't even know what gluten was. Nowadays, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who hasn't heard of gluten, right? Everybody, all the food manufacturers are playing into this now too, where everybody is labeling their food gluten-free, gluten-free. And it's kind of neat, but what they're doing is they're just doing a marketing trick in many cases. It's not that they created something special, it's that their food never had gluten in the first place. But if it now says gluten-free, people think that's healthy. Well, I'm here to tell you that, you don't need gluten-free water because there never was gluten in the water. It's befuddling, yet people will spend extra money on this. Secondarily, if you have a gluten sensitivity or full-blown celiac disease, and you go and buy gluten-free versions of food, gluten-free chips and gluten-free crackers and gluten-free bread, just because it's gluten-free doesn't mean that it's healthy for you. And most of the time it's not. You don't need to eat bread. Diets that are high in grains, even if they're a gluten-free grain, are high in omega-6 fatty acids. It promotes inflammation inside your body. That's bad news. So thinking, I'm taking the gluten out, it's gluten-free, it's healthy, hogwash. You can go buy a load of gluten bread, and a loaf of gluten bread costs you $3, but if you buy the gluten-free bread, it's $6.99, and it's half the size, so people say, oh, it's very expensive, it must be healthy. Not necessarily. So we're going to go over that tonight. Gluten is the protein, and it's typically, when we deal with food sensitivities, it's typically proteins inside these different foods that creates an immune system reaction. When we're talking about allergies, there's a specific immunoglobulin that your body produces called immunoglobulin E. And that gives you that instantaneous reaction to a food. It's called a food allergy. Most common one is like a peanut allergy or a nut allergy. I know I have that. It can be life-threatening. If I were to eat a peanut right now, everybody watching the video, you would know like that, he's got a peanut allergy, okay? Because it would happen very quickly. When we're dealing with food sensitivities, it's more of an insidious onset. You don't see something, you don't feel something right away. This is mediated not by IgE, but rather by IgA and IgM. Immunoglobulin A, immunoglobulin M. And when these immunoglobulins start to react to different foods, that's when you develop long-term chronic problems. And because it's not an instantaneous eat it, get a reaction, we don't even think about these things. We can't even imagine that eating a food over the course of the past 20 years has contributed to the ill health that we're experiencing today. However, science bears this out. I mean, you can't refute this. You can, however, ignore it. And that's what traditional healthcare has tried to do. They just ignore it. If I don't look at it, it doesn't exist. Well, they're wrong. And this is why my office is so busy. Because people are told, don't worry, you just eat whatever you want. We ran that test, and I'm going to get to that one later. We ran the test. You don't have any problems. You just eat whatever you want. And they stay sick. They stay sick. If you don't go to someone who knows what they're talking about when dealing with food sensitivities, not only are you doing yourself a disservice, but you could be destroying your health, destroying your life. You can't fool around with this. So let's get back to the gluten. Gluten is the protein that's found in wheat. We also find it in rye, barley, cross-contaminated with oats. We'll go into that a little bit more when we get over here. But it's the protein that's found in wheat. And then there's two different breakdowns of wheat. There's the lectins we find in wheat germ, agglutinin in the sprouted grains, and then the protein part is gluten. Okay, so the gluten is then it's two compounds together: glutenin and gliadin. Gliadin has 4 different isomers, 4 different forms: alpha, beta, gamma, omega. 4 different gliadins. Glutenin is then broken down Well, glutenin and gliadin are both broken down by transglutaminase, an enzyme of which there's 6 different isomers. Breaks these down into deamidated gliadin, 15, 17, and 35. So see, there's a lot of different steps in this process. And the issue is, when you go to the traditional healthcare provider, they're going to check for one form of gliadin, alpha gliadin, and one form of tissue transglutaminase, right? So you've got, 6, 4, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 different things that your body could be reacting to. But the traditional healthcare approach is to test for 2. I mean, that sounds crazy. So out of those 20, they check for 2. If you're not reacting to either of those 2, you're told, don't worry, you don't have a problem. Gluten's not a problem. Eat whatever you want. And you do, and your life continues to spiral out of control. You've got to understand this. You can't just randomly say, oh, there's no problem. If you don't understand that all of these need to be tested for, and when all of these are tested for and you're not reacting to any of them, then I can tell you, yes, you don't have a gluten problem. But if you just randomly pick this one and this one, you're guessing. Now, why even run a test if it's not going to be an appropriate test? It is not the gold standard, but that is what's run in the traditional healthcare approach. It's very common to see people that are not reacting to that 1 out of the 6 transglutaminases and alpha gliadin. They come to my office, they're told, no, we don't have that issue. We run first a serum blood test for immunoglobulin A, immunoglobulin G, and if those values come back above the 50th percentile, I'll say, yeah, we can run the food sensitivity panel on you. The gluten sensitivity test that we use tests for all of these things. And it'll come back negative here and negative there, but they're reacting to, beta gliadin and 2 different forms of deamidated gliadin and wheat germ agglutinin. So, there's lots of things that are flaring up the immune system, just not the 2 that the traditional healthcare provider looked at. So then people will say to me, invariably, they'll say, why didn't my doctor tell me this? I say, I don't know. Either your doctor doesn't understand this, doesn't know this. I don't know. Ask your doctor why your doctor doesn't know this stuff. All right. So let's move over here. We talked about the rye, barley, and oats, right? Wheat is the big one because wheat is what we eat more of than anything else in this country. We eat wheat for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks. We're constantly eating stuff made from wheat, from flour, from grains. And it's not good on many, many different levels. All of these, wheat, rye, barley, oats, they're all grains. Grains, like I said before, are high in omega-6 fatty acids, and they create inflammation. When your diet is very high in omega-6 and very low in omega-3, that's the traditional, the standard American diet, that is what's called a pro-inflammatory diet. So we're creating inflammation by eating these things, and we eat it all the time. We eat cereal in the morning, we eat sandwiches for lunch, we eat pasta and cakes and cookies and donuts and whatever. That's high in omega-6. We're not eating massive quantities of fruits and vegetables. Many people, even here in Eastern North Carolina, don't eat fish. I can't believe people don't eat fish. That's a good source of omega-3 fatty acids. So what you want to do is make sure that your omega-3 fatty acid intake goes up and drop down your omega-6. That's one other issue when we eat gluten and these other grains. Secondarily, when these things get broken down inside your body, they get turned into sugar. And it's all sugar. So you can eat a bowl of cereal, even if it's not sugar-coated cereal. If you eat a bowl of cereal, it gets turned into sugar. And so you get a spike of sugar. And every time you get a spike of sugar after you eat foods, you get a spike of insulin. And a spike of insulin is bad news. Insulin spikes inside your body, insulin surges, mess with your hormones. It messes with brain function. I mean, it's just really, really bad. So you don't want to eat foods that are high in sugars. But if that's what you have is a bowl of cereal, you're getting sugar in your milk and sugar in your cereal, it's not good. So, rye, barley, and oats, these are also, rye and barley contain gluten, so you need to avoid these two if you have a gluten sensitivity. But the only way you're going to know is if we run the proper test. Oats. Oats are a conundrum because oats inherently don't have gluten. And I think it was, there's a famous cereal manufacturer, the little circles in the yellow box. They came out maybe a year or so ago and said that they are certified gluten-free because they're made with 100% oats. And oats don't have gluten. Fast forward 6 months or so, and there's multiple lawsuits against them because children or any kind of people of all ages were eating them thinking they're safe and having kinds of reactions to them, whether it was a kid with celiac or a grown-up with food sensitivity, it doesn't matter. So, they kind of peeled back and they said, okay, we're not going to advertise this anymore. Well, they weren't lying in that oats don't have gluten. The issue is that many times oats are stored in the same storage facilities as wheat, rye, and barley, so they can get cross-contaminated. Oats are also manufactured or processed in factories that also process wheat, rye, and barley. Again, another cross-contamination point. And then thirdly, shipping, where we can ship these things, clear across the country in trucks. Lots of times, that's a third source of cross-contamination. So if you are billing yourself to be a gluten-free food, you better make sure that you have never come in contact with anything, a facility, storage, shipping that has dealt with wheat, rye, and barley. And even, the labeling laws in this country, quite frankly, stink. They're atrocious. But here's one thing I will give them, is in this instance, they do have packaging where it says that, this was manufactured in a facility that also processes peanuts or also processes wheat or processes dairy. So even if that food doesn't have the protein that could create the sensitivity, they let you know it's been processed in the same environment as potential irritants. So oats are something that you need to be careful with. Next, we talk about cross-reactivity, right? We talked about cross-contamination if gluten just, gets into something. Cross-reactivity is something where your immune system has gone wonky, and this is very common. And the two food sensitivity panels that we run is one array deals with all of these different forms of gluten. And then the next array that we run is about 26 different foods that may be cross-reactive with gluten. So basically, gluten gets inside your body, and if your immune system doesn't like it, it will attack it and it creates an immune response. There are proteins in other foods that your immune system kind of mistakes as gluten, and it says, oh, look guys, it's gluten, kill it, and it creates another immune response. But there really isn't gluten in there. So, it's kind of like your immune system has gotten confused because you've been eating this for so long and your immune system gone wonky. So the things that you need to look at, cross-reactivity, are things like casein and soy and corn and rice and the list goes on and on. There's 20-something different foods that we check for. So it's theoretically possible that somebody could have a gluten sensitivity and they are cross-reactive to 6 other foods. So let's say you go to your traditional healthcare provider and they run their standard test for alpha-gliadin and one form of tissue transglutaminase, and by some miracle you're reacting to one of those. You're reacting to alpha-gliadin. So it comes back and you're actually positive. So the doctor says, yeah, it looks like you are having some kind of issue with gluten. What you need to do is go gluten-free for the next 2 weeks and see how you feel. And so it's your doctor. You listen to your doctor, right? The doctor knows what he's talking about, we hope. So for the next 2 weeks, you go gluten-free. You don't eat anything with gluten. But instead you buy the gluten-free bread and the gluten-free cereal, and you're eating 6 or 8 other grains or other foods that your immune system is still cross-reactive to. You keep eating these foods. You just took out the gluten. Do you think after 2 weeks of taking out gluten, yet still eating the other foods, do you think you're going to feel any better in 2 weeks? Absolutely not. You won't. So then you and your doctor will say, must not really be a big issue because I took the gluten out and I still feel crummy. That's not the way it works. You've got to do the proper testing. You know, this really drives me up a wall when the wrong test is done, there's a wrong interpretation, and your life is ruined because of it. You've got to take charge. You know, that's why I hope you while you're watching this, you're sharing it with other people, because this is important stuff. Your life may depend on it. Cross-reactivity needs to be taken into account. Leaky gut syndrome. And I could go on for an hour tonight just about leaky gut syndrome, but I won't, I promise. Leaky gut syndrome sounds horrible, and let me tell you right now, it is horrible. When you are eating these foods, whether it's gluten, casein, soy, rice, potatoes, corn, whatever foods you might be having an immune system reaction to, that can create leaky gut syndrome. Other things could be chronic use of antibiotics like fluoroquinolones. Destroy the lining of your intestines. Infections, chronic bacterial infections, which are followed up with antibiotics and another infection, an antibiotic, an infection, an antibiotic. And if we don't replace the normal gut flora, the normal bacteria that's supposed to live there, that's another way you can develop leaky gut syndrome. Basically what it is that the cells in your intestines are lined up very tight together. And when you are eating food, there's supposed to be a small opening that allows proteins, vitamins, minerals to get through the lining of your intestine and get into your circulatory system where they're carried off to wherever they are needed. And there are molecules that hold this together: occludin, zonulin, actomycin, and these are things that keep you together. But when you keep eating foods and you have bacterial infections and you've taken antibiotics a dozen times in your life, it's not unusual to see that tight junction is now wide open. And when this is wide open, now you're starting to get large undigested molecules getting into your circulatory system, which is basically like throwing gasoline on the fire in your immune system. So you need this piece of the puzzle here in order to develop these problems. You have a food that you're sensitive to, right? You're eating that food, that's your trigger. You've got a leaky gut, and you're having an immune system reaction to it. And it's just a vicious cycle. So now you're starting to get other large molecules of undigested foods like rice and corn and milk or potatoes, and now your body's starting to say, what is that? I have no idea what that is. So your immune system starts to attack that, and that can be part of the process of developing cross-reactivity. So if you've got leaky gut syndrome, and the test that we run for this checks for antibodies against occludin and zonulin and actomycin. And if you have antibodies against these things, you don't have tight junctions. You've got leaky gut. You need to first remove the foods, plural, that are contributing to the leaky gut. Well, how do you know what foods are contributing to it? You have to run the test. Run the gluten test. Run the cross-reactivity test. Remove all of them. not just gluten. Remove all of the foods that your body's having an immune system reaction to. Take the foods away, then you have to take something to heal the leaky gut. And there's lots of different things. We like one product in particular, but there's a couple of different things out there that are okay. I have my favorite, everyone has their own. And when you can do that, you can actually heal up the leaky gut. Now, this could take months. It could take months to deal with. You also have to, like I said, take into account whether there is any kind of infections, bacterial or viral infections, and as well is there any kind of chronic antibiotic use that has led to a decrease in the good bacteria inside your gut. So it could take a good long while to heal up the leaky gut. Get rid of the foods, take some supplements to heal the leaky gut, calm down the immune system, maybe some vitamin D, essential fatty acids, and glutathione, and then kill any bad bacteria that are inside of you, preferably without the use of antibiotics, and then repopulate the gut with good biotics, a probiotic. We also recommend that people eat foods that feed the good bacteria. We got a couple of different foods that we recommend for that too. If you have any questions there, feel free. Ask, comment, call. All right, so when you've got this gluten sensitivity, you're reacting to rye, barley, oats, you've got cross-reactivity to multiple different things, you've got the leaky gut syndrome, antibodies against occludin, zonulin, actomycin. Now we start to develop later in life autoimmune issues. There's a new patient that came in within the past 2 weeks, and I said we have to run all of these lab tests, blood work. And so she said, okay, let me take it to my doctor. We could have run the test, but she wanted to go to see her doctor. So she goes to her traditional healthcare provider and says, Dr. McCarthy wants to run all these tests. And she looks at it and says, you don't need to have these tests done. You don't have any of these problems. Why is he running these tests? You don't have any of these problems. So today, I got her blood work back. The results went to the doctor. The doctor's office faxed them over to me. I don't even know if the doctor's seen them. I can't wait to have this conversation. This person has multiple different problems. A bacterial infection, a viral infection, and an autoimmune disease, and her blood sugar is bordering on diabetes. But the doctor said, you don't have any of these problems. Oh, and she's got inflammation up the wazoo. Her inflammatory markers, her inflammation markers were through the roof. But besides that, she's got nothing wrong with her. You know, this is the cavalier attitude that really makes me upset, and this is why I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. This is why I stand here every Thursday night to share this information. You can't just look at a piece of paper and say, you don't have these things. How do you know? Run the test. Run the right test. So, I can't wait to have a talk with that doctor if we ever do talk. But gluten and food sensitivities are a big piece of creating autoimmune conditions. Gluten, I would tell you right now, is a huge player in Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Hashimoto's is the #1 cause of hypothyroid. Hypothyroid meaning your thyroid is kind of gone downhill. It's not producing as much thyroid hormone as it should. You're kind of gaining weight easily. You got no motivation, depressed. Your get up and go is gone. We see a lot with females that their eyebrows will start thinning. They'll start losing their hair. The hair thins significantly. Depression, they wind up taking antidepressant drugs when actually it's Hashimoto's, but they've never been tested. This woman that we talked about today, she was never tested. She would never know if she has Hashimoto's unless I asked to run the test. But again, points me back to gluten. There's definitely an issue with gluten. I'm telling you. So she's getting off of it, whether we run this test or not, whether we can run this test or not. You got to get off of gluten. Neurological issues. This is huge. There's case reports. There's a great case report of someone who was dealing with, who was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and turns out it wasn't ALS. It was actually a gluten sensitivity, a very severe neurological reaction to gluten. Gluten attacks, well, gluten can create your immune system attacking your nervous system. Things like multiple sclerosis, right? Very closely linked with gluten and or casein. Milk butyrophilin is very closely related to multiple sclerosis. So again, it's not like, hey, take 2 weeks and stop eating it, and if you don't feel any better, you just go on ahead and eat it. You better know what's going on, because you don't want to mess around with Hashimotos or multiple sclerosis, or the list of autoimmune diseases is growing rapidly. And many people think if you eat a food, it's going to give you a bellyache if you got a problem. Well, over 85% of the immune system reactions happen outside of the gut, which means like in your brain, in your joints. It's bad. Rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic, when you're talking about autoimmune conditions, diabetes, MS, lupus, scleroderma. These are bad situations. And it could be, if not completely due to a food sensitivity, it could be mostly driven by a food sensitivity. And you don't know if you have a food sensitivity because you haven't had the proper test done. Another thing we see a lot, especially with gluten, is depression and anxiety. Right? I said it can affect your nervous system. It can affect your brain. It can affect your body chemistry, your body's production of dopamine and serotonin, neurotransmitters that you need for that, that sense of well-being, the joy of life. And when gluten disrupts these pathways, you start to develop symptoms of depression and anxiety. You go to your doctor. What do you get? You get SSRIs. They give you drugs. So it's like, if this is the cause and you're eating it and it's causing this, and then you take the pill and you feel a little bit better, but the next day you wake up and you eat this and it causes this, so you take the pill and you feel a little bit better. So you take the pill every day and you say, well, I'm functioning better, but you didn't fix the problem. I get emotional about this because there's just so many people in this country who are taking drugs for things like this that don't need it. Hashimotos is another one. Hashimotos isn't really a thyroid disease. It's just that the thyroid is the organ that's attacked. So we'll see people who are diagnosed with Hashimotos and the doctor says take Synthroid. That doesn't fix a thing. You got to address the immune system. It drives me crazy. And the last thing we're going to talk about are kids on the spectrum. I don't know what the actual numbers are nowadays, but it's mind-boggling. And I saw someone was talking about it a few weeks ago, that when they were in medical school, the numbers were 1 in 100,000 kids or 10,000 kids developed autism or wound up on the spectrum. And now it's something like 1 in 45. 1 in 45 are somewhere on the spectrum. Autism, Asperger's, ADD, ADHD. There is a huge association with food sensitivity and these things here. And I'm not telling you that food sensitivity causes autism or Asperger's or ADD or ADHD. I'm telling you that it contributes. There is no doubt in my mind that this wrecks guts. And if you look at what the typical kid on the spectrum eats, that's what they eat. Gluten and casein the protein in milk. That's what they eat. They eat mac and cheese. That's gluten and casein. They eat pizza. That's gluten and casein. They eat frozen chicken nuggets. That's gluten galore. And many kids on the spectrum will only eat certain foods. That's it. I'll have this and this and this. And there's sensory and taste issues that they have, sensory integration issues. So that's all they'll eat. And typically you will eat the foods that perpetuate problems. One of the things that we see with people with gluten issues is they lack a specific enzyme called DPP4. And when your body can't break gluten or casein down because of DPP4, it stops. The end point are molecules called gluteomorphine or caseomorphine, morphine. So it's kind of like your body will break that food down to a certain point, and it's kind of like morphine. So, it gives you a little bit of a brain buzz. You eat the food, your brain says, oh, I like that, I like that. So guess what? You're going to eat it again, and again, and again, and again, and again. So, whether it's sensory or taste or texture issues, plus you're adding morphine into the brain mix, it's just a downward spiral. Now, of course, parents are well-meaning that I've got to feed my kids something. Oh, goldfish are another classic one. These kids will eat goldfish all day long. So that's all they really get is gluten and casein, and we feed it to them because we're worried that they're going to fade away. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you it's easy. Just take the food away from your autistic nonverbal child and make them eat steak and broccoli. It's not easy. I don't have a simple solution for you. But what I will tell you is if your child is dealing with these issues, or you're dealing with depression or anxiety, or you're dealing with autoimmune issues, and you don't know what the food sensitivities are, you have got to find out. All right, so I want you to ask questions down below, or I want you to give me a call in the office, and I'll be more than happy to discuss this with you and help you find someone. That if you don't live in my area, I'll help you find someone who's close to you who can help you manage these issues. All right, I thank you very much. Have a good night.